Bishop Hendricken came to Rhode Island. He was an Irish immigrant, actually. Bishop Hendricken was asked by the Bishop of Hartford to come to the United States to minister as a priest. He originally wanted to be a missionary to Asia and was convinced after a meeting with the Bishop from Hartford that America was indeed a missionary country, and so he was open to the Holy Spirit and actually changed his course. So he ended up coming here as a priest and settled in Hartford, Connecticut, and was ordained for the Hartford Archdiocese. One of the greatest stories about Father Hendricken's life is his voyage from Ireland to America. Remember, he would have come over on a ship. There were no planes back then for passengers, and on the ship there was a condition that was put on him because of the anti-Catholic sentiment of the day. He wasn't allowed to wear his priestly cassock, his robes, nor was he allowed to function publicly as a priest, which was common in that time in this part of the world. So he had these rules to follow, and he got word when he was in his cabin one day that there was a woman also from Ireland in steerage, the poorest section of the ship, that was dying, and she requested a priest and wanted what's called viaticum, or the last rites. Father Hendricken immediately put on his priest clothes and took his viaticum, the things that he needed to share the sacrament with the woman, and went without any hesitation to her cabin and to see her, and he gave her last rites, the graces of the sacrament of the sick. It infuriated the ship's captain, and the ship's captain had his crew turn on Father Hendricken and literally beat him, and he was beaten to the point of being unconscious. He actually lost consciousness on the deck. And there was a man by the name of Samuel Davies who ended up emigrating and living in Illinois, who interceded. He was a Lutheran, and him and some other Protestants interceded to save Hendricken's life. And without their intervention, we wouldn't even be speaking about this man today, nor would he be the first Bishop of Providence. Hendricken's heart is revealed, I think his priestly heart is revealed in that act with his heroic charity, where he just responded to the person's need and literally put his own needs a second without hesitation. Obviously, we're certain. There's been documentation done, and people gave sworn testimonies shortly after his death of this particular, what's called the incident at sea. It's an incident of great love. It's an incident of him being willing to suffer for the gospel. He was definitely had an incredibly the heart of Christ and was willing to even physically suffer for that. At the time that Bishop Hendricken came to the United States, he was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Hartford, which actually encompassed the state of Rhode Island, what is now the Diocese of Providence. So when he came here and went to Waterbury, Connecticut, in the New Haven area to minister, it was all one big diocese with very, very few Catholics actually at that time. But he had his missionary spirit. He was willing to change his plans, if you will, to answer God's call, and came here and had a very, very successful pastoral ministry in Connecticut. While he was there in Connecticut, as a matter of fact, Father Michael McGivney, who's the founder of the Knights of Columbus and is on the road to sainthood, Father Tom Hendricken was his pastor at his parish in Connecticut and inspired him to the priesthood. One of his greatest influences in his life was Father Hendricken's own priesthood. And there is a story told that Father Hendricken even took Michael McGivney, who would now be Father Michael McGivney and almost Saint Michael McGivney, to Quebec, Canada by train to seminary studies. So Father Tom Hendricken, I think the reports are that he inspired approximately about 13 or 14 members of his parish to pursue a priestly vocation. So he was also a great promoter of priestly life and vocations in the church. So Father Thomas Hendricken was serving in Connecticut, and Pope Pius IX at the time, more and more Catholics were living in the Providence area. Remember, the Diocese of Hartford would have encompassed Cape Cod, Massachusetts, all of the state of Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And the numbers of Catholics began to increase, and Providence even had more Catholics living in it than Hartford did. So what happened was that Bishop Riley in Hartford petitioned Pope Pius IX to form the Diocese of Providence, and of course every diocese needs its own bishop. So Bishop Hendricken, Father Tom Hendricken, became Bishop Hendricken and was consecrated a bishop in 1872. When that happened, it was a whole different life. At that time, the Diocese of Providence consisted of Cape Cod and all of the state of Rhode Island. Later on, the Fall River Diocese would break away from Providence. So Bishop Hendricken had all of Cape Cod, Nantucket, and all of the state of Rhode Island, and the church was growing by leaps and bounds because there were so many immigrants coming in, and the Catholic population, although very discriminated against, was growing at a very, very quick rate. One of the greatest testimonies that we have physically in the diocese to Bishop Thomas Hendricken's life and his service is our cathedral itself. That too provides us a backdrop, not only for the life of the history of our diocese, but of Bishop Hendricken's priesthood, his episcopal service. One of the dreams that he had was to erect an appropriate cathedral for the new diocese. And he worked tirelessly. He went around to parishes and collected the money himself. Whenever he had confirmation, he would often have a collection for the sake of the cathedral. There's tremendous records in the archives of the diocese where we see he literally kept track of everything that people gave and people did. It was really one of the greatest goals of his episcopate was to have this cathedral built. Remember, this is horse and carriage days, days of tough weather. Bishop Hendricken was very ill. He was a terrible asthmatic and was often sick, and even the last 6 years of his life was always ill and never had a full night's sleep. We know for certain, all the bishops and his friends have written that he never slept one entire night the last 6 years he was the Bishop of Providence. Nevertheless, with all his maladies and all his illness, he went around the whole diocese and raised the funds and met with the architects and commissioned our cathedral. What we're blessed to still have in the archives of our diocese is this instrument that was used by Bishop Hendricken himself on November 28th in 1878, and this was used by him to lay the cornerstone of the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul. When he would have used this, it would have been 4 years into his office as bishop, into his term as bishop with us. And so he laid this cornerstone with great, great hopes and great efforts and great sacrifices on the part of all the people of the diocese. But imagine the joy when he held this and laid that cornerstone and really set out on a course that would really bless our whole diocese. Even today in the new millennium, this building remains a great source of strength for us, the place where the bishop's cathedra and chair is. One of the most glorious and paradoxical moments, as we find in Christianity so many times and in our own lives, was that Hendricken never saw the cathedral actually finished. He was supposed to consecrate the cathedral at the end of really around 1886. And just before it was to be consecrated in a short time, his asthma, he visited Holy Name Church in Providence and caught a terrible cold. And it took over his asthma and became very, very serious. And he was on his deathbed for about 10 days in the cathedral residence, which he also had built on Fenner Street. And in the end, he died. And the last words on his lips were, "Thy will be done." That's been recorded that he was there with Bishop Stang, his friend, and some other priests and the household staff of the cathedral. And the architect and other friends were gathered around him, as well as the sisters that served at the cathedral. And they know that he said to God, "Thy will be done," and he went home to God. And so ironically and beautifully, the first Mass celebrated in the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul was his funeral Mass, which was an extraordinary event. But the point being that he never saw his work finished, but those last words that he said, "Thy will be done," really inspires Christians everywhere, I think, to live for the next life, to go home to God. And Bishop Hendricken had that freedom, the freedom to believe in eternal life. And literally the monument to Christ that he built in Providence, how appropriate that we're preparing for this great celebration to remind ourselves of how we're supposed to live and imitate his yes to Christ. Even with all our buildings and administration, it's a great call for priests and laity to work together, but also to be inspired by this man's humility before whatever God's will is before his own. And so we couldn't think of a better way for him to end his life than those 4 words, "Thy will be done." One of the things that's striking about Bishop Hendricken is that in his death revealed what his work was in life as a priest and bishop and as a Catholic, because he had a great devotion to the poor, as we're mandated to do in the gospel. And Bishop Hendricken, remember, lived in an anti-Catholic environment. And it's hard for us to imagine there's people today against the teachings of the church, but it was a very different period in the church's life, in really a Puritan and Protestant country where subcultures really engulfed the public culture. So Catholic culture was deeply suspicious with foreign powers and the Pope. But Bishop Hendricken used the mandate of the gospel, I think, to have his preferential option for the poor. He led by example. He would be on the church steps at Fenner Street, which is located right near the cathedral, his residence. And when he was in town at noontime, he would give soup out to the poor himself. He would feed the people regardless of race or ethnicity or anything. And he was known really as a father feeding the people. And I think that's why that at his funeral Mass and his wake, that 30,000 people would come, and you would find that there's even descriptions of people without shoes at the wake, and they let them in to view his body. I remember there was no public transportation, no cars, a lot less people, and 30,000 people came to view his body that was on display. They had what's called the death watch all day and night, people standing guard and praying for his soul. When they came to view his body, there was the royalty of the day, the the people, the greatest, if you will, the statesmen and the large businessmen of the time, but there were also very poor people and homeless people in line with, all mixed together to come and to honor him and to pray for him. So I think his legacy, if you will, was that he reached out to every person. This is actually the ladle that he used. Again, he would stand on the steps of his residence at 30 Fenner Street, which still feeds people today at lunchtime on occasion. But he would stand on the steps and use this ladle to feed the poor. And it sounds like such a simple thing, but I think it was profound in so many ways. The Catholic bishop in a hostile environment to Catholicism, simply feeding the people. So I think it helped build bridges and to witness to the gospel and to the real Catholic faith. Bishop Hendricken had so many accomplishments, far too many to mention, during his tenure in his 14 years as Bishop of Providence. Obviously the completion almost of the cathedral, but also 25 parishes were opened. He invited the Jesuits, the Religious Sisters of Jesus and Mary, the Sisters of Mercy increased, the Ladies of the Sacred Heart. All kinds of religious came in. The number of priests doubled, and 25 new parishes opened. I believe the first parish that was opened was St. Joseph's in Ashton. It was actually the first parish that opened while he was bishop, and the last one just before his death, really 2 months before, was St. Thomas in Providence. It was the last parish that he really founded as bishop. So tremendous influences, tremendous social programs. Bishop Hendricken was a visionary. He had to work with non-Catholics very closely because there was so much suspicion and discrimination against the church, but he was able to break that by his humility, by his intelligence, by his service and his example. He really entered into great relationship. One of his best friends was the mayor of Providence at the time, who died just 3 days before his death. And many of the papers and the stories of that time talk about their friendship. He was invited to serve on the Providence School Board. He was also helping public schools open, as well as opening a slew of Catholic schools and orphanages and things. So just an incredible person for the state of Rhode Island, as well as the Diocese of Providence. So he was a very, very gifted administrator. He was gifted for rhetoric. He was a teacher. He loved teaching. He would actually teach himself in some of the schools and places that he visited. So he was really just selfless and a visionary, I think, a visionary for things, including the cathedral, which was his biggest legacy monumentally, but obviously the faith of the people. And the founding of the Providence Visitor on newspaper was under his time as bishop as well. He felt the call to communicate to the people and to make the church's opinion known in a very hostile environment. So he was actually able to use the media very well, which also helped him to raise funds and to catechize the people and to break down barriers and walls and discriminatory opinions about Catholics in our area. Bishop Hendricken's funeral was certainly one of the most powerful and glorious and sad and hope-filled events of that part of the century in Rhode Island. The accounts of his funeral are very dramatic, and particularly at the end, I think is important for us now, is to look back. His casket was draped in purple velvet, and it's still intact. We put that casket inside of another box for the upcoming reinterment for Bishop Hendricken. But it was placed underneath. They described every detail of the walk, who was there, the music that was playing, what it was like to be in the cathedral, the tears of the people, really lamenting the passing of this great priest and great bishop. But they went and they brought his body downstairs and put it underneath the back, underneath the altar. Underground is where the casket was, and it laid there for 121 years, until in the year 2006, Bishop Tobin commissioned this new sarcophagus, which is a tomb that you can see, sort of like at the Vatican, the Pope's tombs are outside. We have that in the cathedral now, so very beautifully, Bishop Hendricken's body will be transferred into this sarcophagus upstairs in the cathedral. December 8th is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. It's a holy day of obligation for Catholics. And Bishop Tobin has designated that day as the day that the mortal remains of Bishop Hendricken will come back to the cathedral. So his casket with his remains in it will actually be brought back to the cathedral 121 years after his funeral mass was celebrated, and his body was placed underneath really in the lower basement, the cellar of the cathedral. He's been taken out of there. So there were jackhammers and prayer done, and very, very beautifully, reverential way. Bishop Hendricken was removed several months ago and has been temporarily put at St. Anne's Cemetery in Cranston in the mausoleum. And on December 8th at noontime, his body will come back, escorted back to the cathedral, and you're invited to come to that. It's open to the public, and I certainly hope as many people from our diocesan family can come and be there and to look back so that we can look forward. It's a great moment. It's going to be a very sacred, a very powerful moment, and a moment that I think will enable us to celebrate the dogma of the Immaculate Conception in a real profound way.
Please join Bishop Tobin on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, at the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, 12 noon, for the reinterment Mass of Bishop Hendricken.
This spot in the cathedral was chosen for Bishop Hendricken's sarcophagus because of the stained glass window that it sits under. The stained glass window depicts Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, and as a bishop, he is the servant of all the people, and this would be the appropriate spot for the sarcophagus of the first bishop of Providence. A sarcophagus is made of stone, and it holds the remains of the body and or a coffin. The sarcophagus date back to 350 BC, and it's a Greek word meaning flesh eater. The Egyptians would wrap their loved ones in tape, mummify them, and then place them in the sarcophagus. Many times they would put them in another box, a casket as we know it today, and place that in the sarcophagus. The difference between a sarcophagus and a crypt is a crypt has no identity to the individual. A sarcophagus identifies who the individual is. If you go to the Vatican, you'll see saints and popes that are buried in a sarcophagus, and they depict the saints or pope's lifestyle. This sarcophagus here for Bishop Hendricken is made strictly for him. It has his emblem on the front, his name, and so no one else would ever be buried in there because it's unique just to him. The granite came from Brazil. We searched throughout New England and the United States to find a granite that would best match the marble on the wall. It's a Candias green granite, again from Brazil, and it weighs approximately 2,100 pounds. I designed the sarcophagus, and I chose this design because Bishop Hendricken was a very simple individual, and so I just had a beveled top with his crest in the center and a plain front to the sarcophagus. Once again, Bishop Tobin believed that Bishop Hendricken, being the first bishop of Providence, should have access from the people of the diocese here in the cathedral. Many first bishops of the dioceses throughout the United States are buried in their cathedral.
In honor of the reinterment of Bishop Hendricken into the upstairs of the cathedral in a sarcophagus, the namesake school of his, Bishop Hendricken High School in Warwick, commissioned a piece of art, an artwork that's very, very unique. It's called an illuminated manuscript. And you might be familiar with in the Middle Ages, if you see sometimes in the museums, they have manuscripts where monks particularly painted with powdered gold and they powdered gold paint, and they prayed, and they would come with some kind of image of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, or one of the saints, or the gospel. Particularly in the gospels, when there weren't printing presses, one of the revered means of art was illuminated manuscript. It's a very rare art form today. Very few people can do it. There's a man by the name of Jed Gibbons in Chicago, Illinois, who the school commissioned in honor of this Mass and of this transferal to tell the story of Bishop Hendricken's life in the art form of illuminated manuscript. So if you take a look at the manuscript, it's very, very beautiful. It's one of a kind, the only kind. It's been commissioned, again, for this purpose, for this time in the life of our diocese and of our school community in his name. But if you look closely, Bishop Hendricken is holding the cathedral of the Diocese of Providence, again, which he never saw its completion, but he worked so tirelessly. If you look behind him, there's a map of Ireland, indicating where he came from as an immigrant and as a missionary to us. There's a ship in the back indicating that incident at sea, where he was willing to really suffer literally and physically for the faith and to bring the grace of the sacraments to that dying woman in Steerage. If you look around the border of the manuscript, you see that Celtic imaging that goes on that represents, again, that Irish spirituality. If you look, there's the symbols of his office to the right. There's a mitre and crozier symbolizing his office as bishop. In the lower left-hand corner, we find from that incident at sea what he would have used to give the sacrament of the sick, or viaticum, to the dying woman. You see the pyx with the oil, this breviary or prayer book, a similar book to this one that he would have had with him, and also the stole that is the symbol of the office of the priest when Father Hendricken did that. Around the borders of the manuscript you find 3 pearls, and the pearls represent the pearls of wisdom. Again, his motto being, wisdom is better than all things. And that comes from the story in Matthew's Gospel. The one who finds the great pearl gets everything and sells everything to have that wisdom, that pearl, as Hendricken did in his life. Then the pearls are sitting on a symbol of the Trinity, a heart made into the triangular representing the 3 persons but one God. There's also a hidden shamrock up on the left inside the Celtic border, which makes things a little fun to try to figure that out. But it's a very beautiful thing. It was born from prayer by Jet Givens. He took all the things we sent him about Bishop Thomas Hendricken's life and his life as a missionary and a priest, and then he used the powdered gold to paint this image. Again, that's very particular and a one of its kind. So it'll be featured at this upcoming Mass for the reinterment. It'll be actually the cover of the Mass booklet and an explanation on the souvenir booklet on the inside. You'd be welcome to look at that, or even go on, I'm sure, and we'll have it on the diocesan website soon, to be able to look at that and see it for yourself. It's quite an extraordinary work.
Please join Bishop Tobin on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, at the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, 12 noon, for the reinterment Mass of Bishop Hendricken.